What if I told you that the most financially trapped person in any room isn't the one without education, without connections, or even without opportunities? It's the person who believes they're making smart money decisions. You know the type. Budgets religiously, clips coupons, avoids lattes, follows every financial guru's advice. Society calls them financially responsible. Robert Kiyosaki called them something else entirely. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why this person will stay broke forever, while people who break all the traditional rules build wealth. Or maybe you're that person following all the wrong advice. But first, let me show you exactly what I mean. You walk into a financial planning office and see two people. At one desk, there's Jessica, meticulously tracking every expense, proud of her emergency fund, following the traditional path to financial security, classic responsible saver. At another desk, there's Marcus, who just spent his last $1,000 on a business course, has almost no savings, and looks completely unbothered by conventional financial advice. Who would you bet on to be wealthy in 10 years? Hold that thought, because what I'm about to tell you will flip everything you believe about money. Marcus just invested in an asset that will 10x his income. Jessica is saving pennies while inflation destroys her purchasing power. Marcus sees opportunities that require risk. Jessica is optimizing her budget to stay safely broke. So why does everyone think Jessica is being smart and Marcus is being reckless? Here's the uncomfortable truth. You judge Marcus because he threatens everything you believe about how wealth works. Kiyosaki spent his entire life studying people like Marcus, and what he discovered was this: society doesn't fear broke people. We fear people who refuse to follow the financial rules that keep everyone else poor, because they prove that everything we've been taught about money, saving, and security is a lie designed to keep us trapped. But here's what Kiyosaki knew that nobody talks about. The person who stays broke isn't financially irresponsible. They're following advice that was designed to create employees, not wealth builders. While everyone else is saving their way to poverty, the wealthy are playing a completely different game. And that game, that's exactly what will change your financial future. But to understand why, we need to dig into the 7 mistakes that keep people poor forever. Kiyosaki wrote, "The poor and middle class work for money. The rich have money work for them." But what happens when you've been taught that working hard for money is the only respectable path? If you've ever felt trapped despite doing everything right financially, this video is for you. Like, subscribe, and let's destroy the myths keeping you broke together. Leave a comment about which of these mistakes you've been making without realizing it. That's the person who stays poor forever. They're a walking contradiction that doesn't make sense. Works harder than almost anyone, but never gets ahead. Makes responsible decisions, but stays broke. Follows expert advice, but sees no results. And this terrifies us because if hard work and responsibility don't create wealth, if financial discipline doesn't lead to prosperity, if doing everything right keeps you poor, then what does that say about everything you've been taught about money? But here's where it gets really interesting. Kiyosaki discovered something that explains why following traditional financial advice guarantees poverty, and it has nothing to do with your work ethic or intelligence. Remember that frustration you feel when you do everything right financially but still can't get ahead? Kiyosaki had a name for it, and once you understand what it is, you'll never see money the same way again. Quick question. When was the last time you made a financial decision based on building wealth rather than avoiding poverty? Not saving for emergencies, not budgeting to make ends meet, not cutting expenses to survive, but actually investing to build assets that generate income. Can't remember? That's the problem. Kiyosaki discovered that our obsession with financial responsibility isn't about building wealth. It's about managing poverty more efficiently. He called this the poverty mindset. The financial programming we're taught that's designed to keep us working for money instead of having money work for us. And in our culture, the biggest trap is believing that saving and budgeting will make you rich. But here's what Kiyosaki knew. We perform financial responsibility. We track our expenses. We cut our lattes and pack our lunches and feel virtuous about saving $50. Not because it builds wealth, but because we're terrified of being seen as financially irresponsible. Think about your last financial decision. Did it move you toward wealth? Or did it just make you feel like you were doing the right thing? The person who builds wealth isn't focused on saving pennies. They're not proving their responsibility through frugality. They're not even trying to avoid poverty. And somehow, this is the part that breaks people's brains. They often start with less than the people who stay broke following traditional advice. Kiyosaki wrote, "It's not how much money you make, but how much money you keep, how hard it works for you, and how many generations you keep it for. What keeps you broke isn't lack of income. It's that you've been taught to trade time for money instead of building assets that generate money, that you've been programmed to save instead of invest, that you've been convinced that financial security comes from a job instead of from assets." But what if the problem isn't your income? What if the problem is the financial education system designed to create workers, not wealthy people? Here's what the financial advisors don't want you to know. Saving money is a losing strategy in an inflationary economy. Everything you've been taught about how to handle money is designed to keep you poor. Kiyosaki wrote, "Savers are losers." That sounds harsh until you understand what he meant. Every dollar you save loses value every single day. Inflation is silently destroying your purchasing power while you feel responsible for having an emergency fund. The wealthy understand something most people never access. Money isn't meant to be saved. It's meant to be deployed. While you're proud of your savings account earning 0.5% interest, inflation is running at 3 to 7%. You're losing money by being financially responsible. This is why the savings mentality keeps you poor. It's not building wealth. It's managing decline. Remember Jessica from the financial office? While Marcus was investing in his education and business, Jessica was putting money in a savings account that guarantees she loses purchasing power every year. Her financial responsibility is actually poverty in slow motion. Kiyosaki called this financial intelligence versus financial ignorance. Not intelligence about following rules. Intelligence about understanding how money actually works. But here's the really crazy part. The financial system wants you to save. Banks profit from your savings. The government benefits from predictable workers. Financial advisors get paid to keep you in traditional vehicles. The entire system is designed to convince you that saving and budgeting is the path to wealth while quietly ensuring it keeps you broke. And that's exactly why society fears the person who refuses to play by these rules, because they've seen through the game that traps everyone else. Kiyosaki believed that the single most powerful asset we all have is our mind. If it is trained well, it can create enormous wealth. The person who builds wealth has trained their mind to see what savers cannot see. That security doesn't come from saving, it comes from building assets. And that shift gives them access to something traditional financial advice can't provide. But it also makes them a threat to a system built on keeping people trading time for money. Now we get to the real reason society keeps teaching you to stay poor. And it's not what you think. This isn't about individual financial decisions. This is about control. Kiyosaki wrote, "The richest people in the world build networks. Everyone else is trained to look for work. But the person who builds wealth isn't looking for work or following the employee mindset. They're building systems. And that's terrifying to anyone who profits from your labor. Think about it. Our entire economic system depends on one belief, that you should get a good job, work for 40 years, save in a 401k, and retire on a fraction of your working income. You go to school to learn to be an employee. You get a job where you trade your most valuable asset, your time, for money. You're told to save that money in vehicles that barely keep pace with inflation. You retire poor or middle class at best. The person who builds wealth looks at this system and asks one simple question. Why would I trade my time for money when I could build assets that generate money while I sleep? And nobody has a good answer. They have assets generating passive income, businesses creating leverage, investments compounding wealth. This makes them economically independent. Economically independent people are dangerous to systems that depend on desperate workers. But here's the deeper fear that keeps the system running. What if everyone realized they're being taught to stay poor? What if the traditional financial advice of save money, avoid debt, work hard is actually the recipe for lifelong poverty? What if the people giving you financial advice profit from you staying broke? If that's true, then millions of people have been sacrificing their financial potential for nothing. They've been working jobs they hate, saving money that loses value, and following advice that guarantees they'll never be wealthy. The person who builds wealth represents proof that there's another way. A way that doesn't require 40 years of trading time for money. Kiyosaki observed, "The size of your success is measured by the strength of your desire, the size of your dream, and how you handle disappointment along the way." The person who builds wealth has a different dream. They don't dream of a comfortable retirement. They dream of financial freedom now, and that dream doesn't match what the system needs from them. But here's where this gets personal, because Kiyosaki himself was the perfect example of what happens when someone refuses to follow traditional financial advice and gets called reckless for it. Robert Kiyosaki was literally the person who broke all the financial rules of his time, and his story proves this. His colleagues thought he was financially irresponsible. The financial advisors called him reckless with debt. Society labeled him as lucky or dishonest because wealth shouldn't work that way. Kiyosaki spent years doing what looked like financial suicide to traditional thinkers, investing in real estate with debt, building businesses that could fail, taking risks that made financial advisors cringe. Sound familiar? That's exactly what people say about wealth builders today. But here's what Kiyosaki knew that his critics didn't. He had accepted something terrifying. That traditional financial advice is designed to keep you working for money forever. That debt used correctly is a tool for building wealth, not a burden. That saving money is actually the riskiest financial strategy in an inflationary economy. And from that acceptance came insights that changed millions of lives. Assets versus liabilities, the cash flow quadrant, financial intelligence, using debt as leverage. All of these concepts shape how people build wealth today. They all emerged from what looked like recklessness, but was actually financial intelligence applied to the real rules of money. This is the pattern with history's greatest wealth builders. They appeared reckless to their contemporaries because they weren't following the poor person's playbook. John D. Rockefeller used debt to build Standard Oil. Andrew Carnegie leveraged other people's money to dominate steel. Sam Walton borrowed massively to expand Walmart. But society called them reckless, greedy, or lucky because the real rules of wealth creation threaten the system that needs workers. The person who builds wealth today is following the same pattern. And just like Kiyosaki, they're not trying to be financially responsible by traditional standards. They're trying to build assets that generate passive income so they never have to trade time for money again. And that focus looks financially irresponsible to people who've been taught that a job and a savings account equal security. Here's what Kiyosaki knew that our society is still learning. The person following traditional financial advice isn't being responsible. They're being compliant with a system designed to keep them poor. But maybe you're starting to recognize yourself in this description. Maybe you've been following all the traditional advice and wondering why you're still broke. Kiyosaki wrote, "Financial freedom is available to those who learn about it and work for it. But learning the truth about money requires understanding the 7 mistakes that keep people poor forever. Let me show you these mistakes. If you're making these mistakes, understanding them will change your financial life entirely. Mistake number 1, you're saving instead of investing. While wealthy people deploy money into assets that generate cash flow, you're putting money in savings accounts that guarantee you lose purchasing power to inflation. You feel responsible for having an emergency fund. They're buying rental properties, businesses, or investments that pay them monthly. You're being financially responsible by the old rules. They're building wealth by the real rules. That's not financial wisdom versus financial recklessness. That's poverty mindset versus wealth mindset. Mistake number 2, you're trading time for money instead of building leverage. Traditional advice says, get a good job and work hard. But your time is finite. There are only 24 hours in a day. You can never be wealthy trading time for money because you'll always run out of time. Wealthy people build systems, businesses, and investments that make money whether they're working or not. You clock in, they build leverage. You have a job, they own the job. Sound familiar? That's not being a responsible employee. That's being trapped in the time for money prison. Mistake number 3, you're avoiding debt instead of using it strategically. You've been taught that all debt is bad. Pay off your credit cards, avoid loans. Debt equals financial irresponsibility. But wealthy people use debt to buy assets that generate more income than the debt costs. You avoid debt completely. They use other people's money to build wealth. You pay cash for depreciating assets like cars. They finance appreciating assets like real estate. This is the poverty mindset that keeps you broke. Mistake number 4. You're focused on cutting expenses instead of increasing income. You clip coupons, skip lattes, and budget obsessively trying to save $50 a month. Wealthy people spend that time figuring out how to make an extra $5,000 a month. Your focus is on scarcity. Their focus is on abundance. You're trying to manage poverty more efficiently. They're trying to build wealth exponentially. The math on your strategy guarantees you stay broke. Mistake number 5. You're working for earned income instead of building passive income. Earned income is the highest taxed income and requires your time. Passive income from investments, businesses, or royalties is taxed favorably and doesn't require your time. You're working 40 to 60 hours a week for earned income. Wealthy people work to build assets that generate passive income. You'll never be wealthy working for earned income because you'll always be trading time for money. They become wealthy because their income isn't tied to their hours. Mistake number 6. You're investing in your employer's success instead of your own. You dedicate 40 years to building someone else's business through your job. Your retirement depends on a 401k invested in funds you don't control. Wealthy people invest in building their own assets, businesses, and investment portfolios. You make your boss rich. They make themselves rich. You hope your employer takes care of you. They take care of themselves. This is the biggest wealth transfer in history, from employees to owners. Mistake number 7. You're seeking security instead of building assets. Traditional advice says security comes from a stable job, good benefits, and a pension. But companies downsize, industries change, and pensions disappear. Real security comes from owning assets that generate cash flow regardless of economic conditions. You've been taught to seek security from external sources. Wealthy people build security through ownership. You depend on a job. They depend on assets they control. When the economy changes, you're vulnerable. They're protected. You've been taught these are responsible financial decisions. You've been convinced that following this path leads to financial security. Kiyosaki would tell you to stop. He'd tell you that every single one of these mistakes is programming designed to keep you working for money instead of having money work for you. When you stop following poverty programming and start applying wealth principles, you gain access to something completely different, not the desperate hope that saving and budgeting will eventually make you comfortable, but the clear path where assets generate income, leverage multiplies results, and financial freedom becomes inevitable instead of impossible. This is why some people become wealthy while following none of the traditional advice. When you're not exhausting yourself trading time for money, you have capacity to build systems that generate money. This is why your traditional financial responsibility keeps you broke. When you're focused on managing scarcity instead of creating abundance, you guarantee poverty no matter how disciplined you are. But accepting this truth, that everything you've been taught about money is designed to keep you poor, that's the hardest part. Now comes the practical question. How do you build wealth in a world that's programmed you to stay poor? Kiyosaki believed that the more a person seeks security, the more that person gives up control over their life. But once you accept that traditional financial advice is poverty programming, you need a strategy for building actual wealth. First, stop saving and start investing in assets. Your money sitting in a savings account is dying. Every day it loses purchasing power. Take that money and invest it in assets that generate cash flow. Real estate that produces rental income. Businesses that generate profits. Dividend stocks that pay you quarterly. Skills that increase your earning potential. These are assets. Your savings account is not. Protect your purchasing power by deploying money into things that grow faster than inflation. Second, learn to use good debt to buy assets, not bad debt to buy liabilities. Bad debt is using credit cards to buy clothes, cars, or consumables that lose value. Good debt is using loans to buy rental properties, fund businesses, or acquire investments that generate more income than the debt costs. Stop being afraid of all debt. Start learning to use debt strategically. The wealthy use other people's money to build wealth. You're using your own money to buy depreciating junk. Third, develop what Kiyosaki called financial intelligence. This isn't learning to budget better. It's learning how money actually works. Understand the difference between assets and liabilities. Learn about tax strategies that benefit business owners and investors. Study how the wealthy use corporations, leverage, and cash flow. This education is worth more than any degree because it teaches you the game the wealthy play. But here's the most important part. You have to stop measuring financial success by traditional metrics. Society wants you to measure success by your job title, your salary, and your savings account balance. The wealthy measure success by cash flow from assets, not income from labor. Financial advisors promise security through traditional vehicles that keep you working forever. But Kiyosaki understood something deeper. Financial freedom is available to those who learn about it and work for it. That work isn't working harder at your job. Your financial freedom might require starting businesses that fail before one succeeds. Your wealth might need investments that don't pay off for years. Your journey might have to include risks that terrify traditionally minded people. And that's not financial recklessness. That's the only path to wealth. Think about it. Every person who built significant wealth was told they were being financially irresponsible. Kiyosaki himself was criticized for his use of debt and his dismissal of traditional savings advice. His strategies seemed reckless for decades to financial advisors locked in the employee mindset. But when people who followed his advice started achieving financial freedom while their traditionally responsible friends stayed broke, everything he'd been teaching suddenly became undeniable. His supposed recklessness turned out to be the only realistic path to wealth. The same pattern happens over and over. The person everyone judged as financially irresponsible suddenly achieves wealth, while those who followed traditional advice stay trapped trading time for money. Because while everyone else was optimizing poverty management, they were building wealth. While others were saving pennies, they were acquiring assets. While others were being financially responsible employees, they were becoming financially free owners. Here's what nobody tells you about building wealth. Your success will prove traditional advice wrong, but the system won't change. Let me say it again. Kiyosaki wrote, "Winners are not afraid of losing, but losers are. Failure is part of the process of success. People who avoid failure also avoid success. You've been taking financial risks while everyone else chose the guaranteed slow death of traditional employment. You've been building assets while they've been building someone else's assets through their labor. And that courage gives you something traditional financial responsibility can't provide: the ability to generate income without trading time, to build wealth that compounds, to achieve financial freedom instead of comfortable poverty. But your success won't announce itself with society's approval. It won't fit the financial success story that traditional advisors want to tell. Instead, it will feel like something you earned through taking risks they were too afraid to take. The rental properties will generate monthly cash flow. The business will scale beyond your personal time. The investments will compound into significant wealth. And when that moment comes, all the years of being called financially irresponsible will reveal themselves as financially intelligent. Every risk you took was actually you understanding how wealth really works. Every traditional rule you broke was actually you following the real rules that the wealthy use. Society keeps teaching traditional financial advice because it needs workers who stay broke enough to keep working. They prove that maybe the problem isn't people who need better budgets. Maybe the problem is a financial education system that teaches poverty management and calls it financial responsibility. If you're someone who followed all the traditional advice and stayed broke, if you're starting to realize that the financial system is designed to trap you, if you've been called financially irresponsible for taking risks that traditional advice condemns, Kiyosaki would recognize you immediately. You're not financially reckless. You're not irresponsible. You're not failing at money. You're starting to understand that the traditional path is designed to keep you trading time for money until you're too old to enjoy wealth. The question isn't whether you should follow traditional financial advice. The question is whether you'll have the courage to learn the real rules of money and apply them even when everyone tells you you're being irresponsible. Because Kiyosaki was right. Financial freedom is available to those who learn about it and work for it. And sometimes the most financially intelligent thing you can do is ignore traditional advice designed to keep you poor, even when the rest of the world calls that reckless. The person who builds wealth isn't society's financial failure. They're proof that the system is designed to create failures, and that's exactly why the system fears them. If this video made you see money differently, Or if you recognize these mistakes in your own financial life, let me know in the comments. Which of these 7 mistakes have you been making, and are you ready to stop? And if you want more content that destroys the financial myths keeping you broke, subscribe and hit that notification bell, because we're just getting started with truths about money that traditional financial advisors don't want you to hear.